I want to share with you a passage of scripture this morning that we find at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, which begins in Matthew chapter 5, concludes at the end of Matthew chapter 7. I'll be reading from the 7th chapter, verses 12 through 14, the Golden Rule, and finishing up with verses 21 through 27. Listen now for God's word for you. Jesus is speaking, and he says, here's a simple rule of thumb guide for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. Add up God's law and prophets, and this is what you get. Don't look for shortcuts to God. The market is flooded with surefire, easygoing formulas for a successful life that can be practiced in your spare time. Don't fall for that stuff, even though crowds of people do. The way to life, to God, is vigorous and requires total attention. Knowing the correct password, saying, Master, Master, for instance, isn't going to get you anywhere with me. What is required is serious obedience, doing what my Father says. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words, words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who built his house on solid rock. Rain poured down, the river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. Annie Dillard should be on your must-read author list. She won a Pulitzer for her book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and another classic called Teaching a Stone to Talk. And in an op-ed in the New York Times, 1991, she wrote these words: write as if you were dying. At the same time, assume that you write for an audience consisting solely of terminal patients. That is, after all, the case. What would you begin writing if you knew you would die soon? What could you say to a dying person that would not enrage by its triviality? I got this book in the mail this week. I heartily suggest that you purchase it on Amazon or wherever it is that you purchase books. It's entitled Closing Arguments from the Pulpit, written by my mentor in ministry, my good friend, Bill Ritter. In an enclosed note with the book, Bill dropped a bomb. He's been diagnosed with ALS. He's 80 years old. It shouldn't shock me, but it did. Don't we all fall into the trap of foolishly thinking that the bright lights in our life are not mere mortals? His preaching transformed mine. Nadia Bolz-Weber said something recently that I love. When I hear someone preach, she said, I want them to break my heart. Ritter did that for me. I try to do that to you. Bill's preaching touched and broke my heart on all kinds of topics, including his 27-year-old son's self-inflicted death. He wrote a book that I recommend to everyone and that I buy for many. Take the dimness of my soul away, healing after a loved one's suicide. Bill taught me that irrelevance isn't an option from the pulpit. A la Annie Dillard, unless you're going to talk about things that matter or should matter, then don't talk at all. Plenty of preachers can give a good speech. Plenty of them can teach. But can they move you to action? I'm praying for you, Bill. I love you dearly. And now, on with a sermon that I hope will not enrage by its triviality. The question really kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. We were sitting in the middle of the Independence Mall in Wilmington, North Carolina, waiting for my mother to finish up some shopping. Will you do my funeral? I looked up for a moment from my sandwich. He continued. Nobody knows me like you do, he said slowly and deliberately, the awful consequence of a plethora of mini strokes. You know the good, the bad, the ugly about me. You know what's really important to remember and what's not. Besides, he said, I won't have to pay anyone if I get you to do it. I looked into those eyes, weakened by the ravaging thievery of diabetes, kidney disease. I said the only thing I could say. Of course, Dad. Of course I will. I'd be honored. It was a lie at the moment, though. Of course it was. The thought of paying tribute to this man at his death was so much more than I wanted to think about. For once, I just wanted to be the son and not the preacher. But that's not what you tell your dad when he asks you to do his funeral. You simply say, of course. As one of my favorite writers, Mitch Albom, says about matters like these, I thought I was being asked a favor when in fact I was being given one. 5 months later, February the 19th, 2002, I stood in the pulpit at Grace United Methodist Church, attempting for a few moments to shed some light on this man through whom God's light shined in some very simple but heartfelt ways. July is a very consequential memory month for me. July 11th is my parents' anniversary date, would have been 64 years. July 11th is also the date my mother died on their anniversary in 2011. July 19th is my father's birthday. So I spent some time this week reflecting on the 21 years since my father graduated from this life to the next. And I've come to the conclusion that Mitch Albom is right on the money. My father did me a favor when he asked me that question on a sunny September day. By making me take a long look at his life, he made me take a long look at mine. I was a very impatient man, prone to disproportional moments of anger with no good reason. My kids would tell you that. There was a growing disconnect between who I wanted to be, really who I professed to be, and the person I was becoming. And with this question, my dad made me take stock of my life. In the last 5 years of his life, my dad was fascinated. He was inspired by a poem that, frankly, I always thought was a little too much like a Lifetime movie script. Not that there's anything wrong with Lifetime, mind you. And what do I know, really? I'm the guy who gagged the first time he read Footprints in the Sand. The last counted has sold 8 gazillion copies. My dad's fascination was with a poem he'd been given by one of his coworkers right before he retired. I think it took him to a place of reflection about the kind of life he'd lived, what he needed to address in his final days. The poem, written by a lady named Linda Ellis, and it's entitled The Dash. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning until the end. He noted that first came her date of birth, and he spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. The dash represents the time she spent alive on earth, and only those who loved her know what that little line is worth. It matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love, and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? You never know how much time is left. They can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real and really try to understand the way other people feel, be less quick to anger, show appreciation more, love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. So when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Your dash. If you haven't seen Oppenheimer yet, you should run, not walk, to see it. Rich in complexity, it makes you think at every level. In a movie full of quotes to ponder, the one near the top of my list is this: theory will only take you so far. Robert Oppenheimer says it first in the physics lab up the road at Berkeley. He repeats it often at Los Alamos. Honestly, I think it's another way of saying what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7. If you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them in to how you live your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. If you don't work my words into the way you live, you are like a stupid carpenter who built a house of cards. Regina Brett of my hometown paper, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, broke my heart, challenged the limits of theory this week. This is what she said in her breathtaking article entitled "Steps of Horror That Bear Witness to Hope." You expect death to haunt you here at Auschwitz, not life. You prepare yourself for the pile of shoes, the stack of luggage that you've seen in every documentary on the Holocaust. But then a room full of joy just levels you. Time is slowly taking the last Holocaust survivors, but here at Auschwitz, time stands still. Time stands still so the world can bear witness, a world that did so little when it mattered so much to do something. I came to Auschwitz, she said, with my sister during one of my book tours in Warsaw and Krakow. After the Nazis filled the prisons in Poland, they needed more room. They turned this empty Polish military base into the largest death camp in the world. We pull into Auschwitz and see the crooked letters that greeted prisoners. Work will set you free. There's so much to absorb, block after terrible block. Medical experiments were done in Block 10. Death sentences were issued in Block 11, which contains the table where a Gestapo court issued 200 death sentences in 2 hours. The washroom where women cleaned up before execution still has their clothes in the sink. One wall bears photos of the prisoners. The fear in their faces follows you down the hall. We stop at the courtyard where candles burn near the death wall. Thousands faced this wall and fell here executed by SS officers. Bullets grew too costly, so they turned to Zyklon B. You see the empty cans on the floor. There are piles of toothbrushes, combs, shaving brushes, rooms full of shoes, a tangle of eyeglasses, pots, pans, bowls. Women carried them, thinking they would get to cook family meals when they got resettled. They wrote their names on their suitcases in white paint so that they could reclaim them. Ella Newman, Hedwig Clement, Peter Eisler, Franz Ergel, Bella Stadler. They carried babies who wore the tiny shoes now preserved under glass. It's overwhelming, she said. It left me too numb to cry. But then I entered Sha'oah, the new multimedia permanent exhibit. It is, I think, the most powerful exhibit in Auschwitz. You stand in an empty room and suddenly the room comes to life, surround sound kind of life. All four walls come alive with Jewish life before the Holocaust, actual black and white home videos of Passovers and weddings, bar mitzvahs and dances, beach vacations, ice skating, parades, meals, best friends arm in arm, men in top hats, a mother pulling a wagon, a man holding his daughter's hand, the life of Jews from Czechoslovakia, Romania, Poland, Hungary, Ukraine, Austria, and France. You get swept up in the joy of the music and the love and the laughter. You just want to stay in that room. You don't want to leave. You want to somehow keep them all alive. But you can't. They're all gone. That is when you weep. The room cracks open your heart. The greatest sign of hope, perhaps the only sign of hope, she says, is easy to miss. The steps inside every block of Auschwitz are worn down from so many visitors willing to bear witness to what happened here and make sure it never happens again. Good people of Community Church, when it comes to living your faith, does your life bear witness to what God has done in you and for you? Is your life lived for something bigger than simply making it to the finish line unscathed? The dash made my father think, and from a new way of thinking came a new way of living. My dad's question made me think. From a new way of thinking came a new way of living. So today's preaching mission is very singular in purpose. I just want to change the way you think. I want you to discard triviality, to embrace the stuff that really matters. In the final analysis, all of what ministry and life is about is relationship, not ritual, not religiosity, simply relationship. My life's work is really only about three things: having a living relationship with a God who's crazy about me, bringing people into relationship with that God, and bringing people into a healthy relationship with one another. So what is it deep down in my bones that I know I know? What is it that will not enrage by its triviality? After some reflection, I distilled what I know into three tiny sentences. Words matter. Actions matter more. Love matters most. Watch the way you talk. Say only what helps. Each word a gift. That's what Ephesians 4 says about the power of our words. To that end, I love the story that John Ortberg, one of my preaching colleagues, tells about visiting his sister during her first parents' weekend at college. We were stuck in a dorm room for an hour, he says, with the mom of my sister's roommate and her 8-year-old son. The woman could not stop talking. For 60 minutes, we were trapped. She told us about her husband, her kids, her political opinions, her health. Like the Energizer Bunny, she just kept going and going. We tried our best to discourage her. We broke off eye contact. We wouldn't nod our heads. It didn't matter at all. Finally, her daughter showed up and she talked herself right out of the room. She said, well, we got to be going. I have a lot of errands to do. Most importantly, I have to get some buttons to fix my husband's shirt. It was then that her 8-year-old son spoke the only words anyone else had said during that entire 60 minutes. He looked at his mother and said, you need a button for your mouth. We all felt like the Spirit of God had just spoken through that 8-year-old boy. So I was thinking this week, wouldn't it be great if there actually was a button for your mouth? Here's what I want you to ponder. How can you practice buttoning up? Here's the prayer I want you to make part of your daily routine. Give me the words to say. Give me the silences to keep. Give me the words to say. Give me the silences to keep. The world might actually be able to survive without your opinion on everything. By praying that prayer and bearing witness to it, by working its way into how you actually live, you can be freed from saying stuff that's destructive or deceitful or judgmental. The Dalai Lama once said, silence is sometimes the best answer, which I interpret as never miss an opportunity to shut up. It is great spiritual advice. Watch the way you talk. Say only what helps. I learned again how much words matter when I reread a letter this week that Nick Cruz, a retired British Navy officer, wrote to his 3 children that went viral, entitled, I Am Bitterly Disappointed. Perhaps you've heard it. I'll summarize. Dear children, it's obvious that none of you has the faintest notion of the bitter disappointment each of you has in your own way dished out to your mother and I. We are seeing the miserable failure of the 4th of your collective marriages. We are constantly regaled with chapter and verse of the happy, successful lives of the families of our friends and being asked about our own children and grandchildren. I wonder if you realize how we feel. We have nothing to say which reflects any credit on us. Fulfilling careers based on your educations would have helped, yet each of you has contrived to avoid even moderate achievement. I have had enough of being forced to live through the never-ending bad dream of your underachievement and domestic ineptitude. I want to hear no more from you until you do something worthwhile. I am bitterly, bitterly disappointed. Dad. When interviewed by the Daily Mail about the letter, Nick Cruz said simply this, honestly, I couldn't have said it any better. I wouldn't change a thing except maybe not having kids at all. Now, several commentators lauded his lambasting. I nearly wept because words harshly spoken cut like daggers. They leave scars that last forever. My office is littered with broken hearts, broken spirits, broken lives because of words that crushed hope and crushed love and crushed relationships until they became dust in the wind. So make me an untrivial promise. Watch the way you talk. Say only what helps. Words matter a ton, but actions matter more. The book of James encourages us to be doers of the word, not merely hearers. Here's what I mean by be doers, by virtue of the words. from, again, one of my favorite authors, the wonderful Bob Goff. I get paid as a lawyer, he says, to collect information, to memorize facts. I've gotten really good at it. What I realized about my faith is that I was doing just that, collecting information, memorizing things about God. I talked about knowing Jesus like we were best friends when actually we hardly knew each other at all. I memorized Bible verses, the names of the books of the Bible in order, but at some point I had to confess that I was stalking Jesus and not actually following him, so I decided I'd stop. The first thing I did was quit going to what Christians call a Bible study. A Bible study sounds like a wholesome thing to go to. Honestly, it is. But are we getting it a little wrong by equating Bible study with following Jesus? Wouldn't it be a horrible thing if we studied the ones we loved instead of bonding in deeper ways by doing things with them? I'd never want to get married to a girl no matter how much I studied her. I'd rather take her sailing or fishing or eat cotton candy with her up on a Ferris wheel. They have a name for guys who just study things about a person they like but don't do anything about it. They're called bachelors. So I started getting together with the same guys each week, he said, and instead of calling it a Bible study, we call it a Bible doing. We've been at it for 15 years now. I found there's a big difference between the two. At our Bible doing, we read what God has to say, but then we focus all of our attention on what we are going to do about it. Just agreeing isn't enough. I can't think of a single time where Jesus asked his friends to just agree with him. He told them to do what he did, day after day after day. If you don't work my words into your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built a house of cards. So here is untrivial ask number 2. Let your walking do your talking. Words matter. Actions matter more. In the end, love matters most. Here's a question for all of you here. When it comes to the most important relationships in your life, do your words and do your deeds align? Jesus longs for you to spend some time with his Father and with your people. But will you make the time? A father comes home after a long day of work. He's tired, worn out, frazzled, worn to a nub. His son meets him excitedly at the door. Daddy, 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 how much do you make an hour? The father just bristles. Good grief, son. I haven't even gotten in the door yet. You're asking me that question? It's really none of your business. Get in the house. Let me come in and relax. Father sits down in his favorite Archie Bunker chair, kicks off his shoes, picks up the newspaper, when his son makes his way up to him again. Daddy, I just want to know how much money you make. Please tell me. You know, it's against my better judgment, says the father, but if it will settle you down and allow me to rest and read, I make about $20 an hour. The boy walks away downcast, and after a half hour passes, he comes back and he says, Daddy, can I borrow $10? At this point, the father just loses his stuff. My God, son, you don't even let me get in the house before you start asking me rude questions about how much money I make. Now you want $10. What new toy do you want this time? Go to your room right now. Stop asking inappropriate questions. Dejected, the boy slinks off to his room. As the father stews in his own juices for a while, he begins to think. He realizes he's let his tiredness get in the way of his relationship with his son. He fishes in his wallet, pulls out a $10 bill, and climbs the stairs to his son's room. Hey, I'm sorry for the way I treated you, he says. Here's the $10 you asked for. The boy's face lights up like a Christmas tree. Oh my gosh, thank you, Daddy, he says. He takes that $10 bill and he runs over to his bed. From behind the pillow, he pulls out a wad of 10 crumpled up dollar bills that he saved from his allowance. Slowly, he counts them out and he says, Dad, here's $20. Can I buy an hour of your time? What would you say to a dying person that would not enrage by its triviality? I'd tell them this every time I could. Theory will only take you so far. Words matter. Actions matter more. Love matters most. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.